Daf Lamed Beis, 12 lines from the top at the 2 dots. Ton Rabbanan, we learned in a brayso Eichel Kazayis Truma, if a Zar eats a Kazayis of Truma B'Shegeg, Mishalim Keren V'Chaimish, he pays Keren V'Chaimish. So this is talking if he eats the Truma B'Yomi Masechet. It's not referring to on Pesach. If it's a Kazayis, he pays the Keren and the Chaimish. Tanakama holds that in order the chiyuv of chaimish is only if there's at least the size of a kazayis that's eaten. Even if it's worth a shava pruta, if it doesn't have the size of a kazayis, the chaimish is not paid. If it's worth a shava pruta, then the keren would have to be paid regardless. But if it's not the size of a kazayis, the chaimish is not paid. Abishol says the payment is not dependent on the volume, the payment is dependent on the value. And if there's a shava pruta, then he pays the chaimish, regardless of whether there is a kazayas or not. My time of the Tanakama, what's the reason of the Tanakama that it's dependent on the volume, on the shiur and the kazayas? Amr Kra, the pasuk says, Ish kiyachal kaidish b'shgaga. The pasuk says if a person eats kaidish b'shgaga, eats truma b'shgaga, and then it says he has to pay a fifth to the kain. He has to add on a fifth to the kain. So it says a lashon of ki yochal, he eats v'achila b'kazayis. The definition of achila, the halach l'mayshmi Sinai, is that achila, whenever we talk about achila, it means a kazayis. It has to have a minimum size of a kazayis, and here it says ki yochal. So therefore, what we're talking about here in terms of the payment of the chaimish is achila of a kazayis, achila b'kazayis. That's the Tanakama of Avishol, not my time. What's the reason of Avishol? Amar Kro, the pasuk says v'nos. It says v'nosa and chamishisa elakain. He has to give the chamisha, the fifth, to the kain. Ve'nasina pachos mishava pruta. Nasina, when it says nasina, it has to be at least the value of a pruta. It has to have at least the value of a pruta to be classified as the sina. So therefore, it has to have at least the minimum size of it has to have the minimum value, rather, of a pruta. It has to be at least shava pruta, the minimum value of a pruta. Frektai says, well, what do you mean? We see nasan in other places where it does not have a minimum value of pruta. We see by truma, that you have to give truma, and we said no, that chita achas paiteres as a cream. In the raisa, even one chita pauters the chiyah for truma. And we say by a kinyan, it says v'nosan l'reyehu, and even though it doesn't have a shava pruta, and by a get, so we know that halachi is by that says kasu get beisurahana. It's kosher, even though it doesn't have a value. So you see that even though it says nesina, it doesn't necessarily have to have a value of a shava pruta. Taisus answers that yes, that's true. Nesina on its own does not have to be a shava pruta, but here the nesina is written in the context of repaying. When it's in the context of repaying, it has to be nasan to give the person that you're repaying to give something of a value of at least a shava pruta. Back to Gemara, ve'idach nami. Well, what about the other Tanam? That meaning Abishol, Haksib Yaichal. That Torah says Yaichal. So how does he learn it? He says v'nos. But what does he do with the fact that the Torah says ki Yaichal and Yaichal means like kazayis? He answers how pratamazik udalsa. That comes to teach us that he only has to pay. It's not saying that it has to have a volume of a pruta, but it has to be in the manner of a chila. If he damages it, let's say the Tsar burns, he destroys the truma, he doesn't have to pay the chaimish. The chaimish is if he consumes it in the manner of an achila, not as a mazik, not as just destroying, not as just in a negative way. The Tanakama aksi v'nosan. How does the Tanakama darshan v'nosan? He answers how we boile ledover how roile is kodesh. It means to teach you is that he repays it not with the value. It's not referring to the value. He repays it v'nosan, something that can be kodesh, meaning something he pays something which then that item that he repays it with becomes true, becomes kodesh. So it's teaching us that it's something that is right to become kodesh. It's not talking about the value. So the way Rashi explains it, that the emphasis on the seif of the pasuk, and it says v'nasan the kodesh to the kohen. V'nasan the kodesh. It's something that is right to become kodesh, and it becomes kodesh. Ton Rabbana, we learned in the Brayso Echel Truma Pachas B'Kazayis. If he eats truma less than a Kazayis, it doesn't have a volume of the Kazayis. Mishalom is a Karen, he pays the Karen, Ve'ena Mishalom is a Chaimish, but he doesn't pay the Chaimish, he doesn't pay the fifth. So hey Chidami, what's the case over here? How is it that he pays the Karen and he doesn't pay the Chaimish? Either less Beishav a Pruta, if it doesn't have a value of a Pruta, then Karen Namin Loilashal, then he shouldn't have to pay the Karen either. Meaning, if the criterion is the value, and you're saying that therefore if it doesn't have a pruta, you don't pay the chaimish, then you shouldn't have to pay the keren either. The isba shava pruta, and it has a shava pruta, chaimish nami l'shal, then you should pay the chaimish as well. More answers lo'ilam, the isba shava pruta. Really, I'll tell you that there's a shava pruta. Va'afil hachi kevin the less bekazayas, but even nevertheless, since there's no kazayas, mishalom is a keren, then mishalom is a chaimish. Then you pay the keren, but not the chaimish, because it has to have a kazayas. Amar Rabbana kamei the Rapapa. So the Rabbana said to Rapapa, "Ha, to like Abishal." No, this is not like Abishal, because according to Abishal, the volume is not a factor. So therefore, if you're telling me over here that it doesn't have a kazayas, so what? As long as it has a shava pruta, according to Abishal, the volume is not a factor. You should have to pay the chaimish as well. So the like Abishal, the Abishal, Hamar kevan the sheish b'shava pruta, alfagav b'kazayas. He says the only factor is the value and not the volume. Now you want to explain it to say over here that we're talking in this case over here that really it has a shava prut, so you have to pay the keren. The keren you'd have to pay regardless, because keren, if you took something of value, you have to pay the value. The chaimish is contingent on the volume. That's not like Abishol, because according to Abishol, it would seem to be that the only criteria is the value and not volume at all. Lord Papa says, no, Afilotem Abishol, you can say it is going according to Abishol. Abishol, Tati boy. Not like we learned before, rather by Rav Papa saying that Abishol requires both. In order to pay the chaimish, it has to have both, at least a kazayas, and a minimum value of a prut. The Gemara, Abishol Tarti, is it true that Abishol really says you require both in order to pay the chaimish? Tanya, we learned in the Brayso Abishol Oimer Sheyesh B'Shava Pruta. If it has a value of a pruta and he ate it b'shegeg chayv b'tashlum, then he has to pay. Then he has to pay the chaimish. As she'ein b'shava pruta, ein chayv b'tashlumim. But if it doesn't have the value of a pruta, you don't have to pay the chaimish. Amrloi, they said, Tabashol, Loi Amro, Shava Pruta. They said to him that the dinner, a Shava Pruta, is Loi Amro Shava Pruta, Ela Linya Mila Bilvad. They said that criteria of a Shava Pruta is only Legabe, the din of Me'ila. If somebody is Nana from the hektish, then he has to pay Me'ila, and he has to pay the Karen HaChaimish and the Korbanosh. So he says that they said that the value of a prut is only a meila. Truma ain't a chayv. But as far as eating truma and the chiyuv of paying by truma, over there it's acheba kazayis. It has to have a kazayis. It has to have a volume of kazayis. You're saying, Abishol, that the payment by truma of payment b'shayiv, eating b'shayiv of chaimish is only has a shava pruta. That, but otherwise not. The taina, this criteria of shava pruta is only legabe meila, not legabe truma. But legabe truma, it depends on volume. So, agav, it mentions that meila, it has to have a shava. It has to have a shava pruta. It's only if it has a shava pruta. If it doesn't have a shava pruta, then there is no meila. What does this mean? the din of a shava pruta that it mentions by Me'ila is the gabi the korban asham. For Me'ila, if a person is moil b'kodesh, pays karen chaimish, and he brings a korban asham. In order to obligate him to the korban asham, it has to be a Me'ila of a pruta. But if it's less than a pruta, even if it's less than a pruta, he still has to pay the karen. What about the chaimish? That's a machlekes rishonim. The Rambam says that for chaimish as well, it has to be a shava pruta. The Rambam says no, that for chaimish it does not. Al kol panim, what are they tying? They tying that for as far as truma, it's not a shava pruta. The criteria has to be a kazayas. V'im isa. Now, if it's true that Abishal really requires both, then they're tying when they tying to the omrloi. They said to him, "Loy omer shava pruta elin mil b'vad of truma." It says, "Enoch ad sheyeh b'gazayis." You have to have a gazayis. Now, if Abishol himself requires both, also gazayis, so kevan sheyesh b'gazayis mi boile. What they should have said to him is not only if there is a gazayis. They should have said since there is a gazayis. If Abishol says you need a pruta and a gazayis, they should have said since there's a gazayis shechayiv, and the pruta is irrelevant. But they said not that way. They said unless there's a gazayis, which implies that Abishol does not require a gazayis. It's a tiyufta. You see clearly that Abishol does not require both. He does not require both. He says the only criteria is a shava pruta. For Papa himself was chayzer from this. He retracted, as we'll see from the following brisa. So the proof we'll only see on the next Amud, but now the Gemara will bring down the brisa at length. The Sanya, the brisa says, V'chata b'shgaga. It says, if a person is mayel, b'shageg, he brings a korban asham. Prat l'mezid. So it says, Chata b'shgaga, which teaches us that the korban asham that he brings from Me'ila is only b'shageg and not b'mezid. The Brisa asks, well, why do I need a pasuk for v'halaydinu? Why can't I learn this out from this kal v'chaymer? Umashar mitzvahs shechiyav behem kares, we see in other mitzvahs, lemashal, chaylev and dam, where if for mezid there's a chiyav kares, paiter behen is a mezid, but there's no korban. So b'mezid there's no korban over there. Me'ila she'in ba kares, me'ila, which b'mezid there's no chorus. There's misa b'dei shamayim, but there's no chorus. Ein adin shepater samezid. Ma'adach by the other averas, chaylev v'dam, for instance, that there is a b'mezid, there's chorus, and there's no korban. So certainly me'ila, which is kal, which is not so chomer, which doesn't have chorus, which has misa b'dei shamayim, certainly there should be no chiyav korban. So what do I need a pasuk for? Tzabrai says no. You can't learn out of a kal v'chaymer. Loyim amid b'shar mitzvah shekain lo chiyav behem misa. You can't compare it because the other mitzvahs there's no misa b'dei shamayim. Tamer b'yila shechay b'misa. How could you compare it to Mila where there's misa b'dei shamayim? Tamad loyim b'shgaga. That's why you need the pasuk b'shgaga prat l'mezid. Now, the more analyzes. V'amler v'nach bar yischler v'chiyah bar avin. Hai tzana mikara alim elei karetz u'lesoif alim elei misa. What's the shakal v'tari here? Originally, they made the kal v'chaymer based on the assumption that chorus is more chomer than misa b'dei shamayim. So that's why it was a kal v'chaymer. Then the kasha was, how can you make the kal v'chaymer that misa b'dei shamayim is more chomer, that me'ila has misa b'dei shamayim? So under what premise are we working here? What is more chomer, chorus or misa b'dei shamayim? And he answered, Hachi Kamar. So he answered as follows. This is what it means to say. Lo yimram b'shar mitzvah shekain lo yichiyah misa b'pachos mikazayis. Meaning, it doesn't mean to say that chorus is that misa b'dei shamayim is more chomer than chorus. That's not what he meant to say. Chorus is more chomer than misa b'dei shamayim. Chorus, he is hoylech hariri. Both have premature death, but chorus, he dies childless. Chorus, he has to do tshuva. Chorus is more chomer. That's not what he means. Chorus is more chomer than misa b'dei shamayim, but it means to say lo im amed b'shar mitzvahs shekain lo yicham bisa b'pachos mikazayis. If there's an aver and a chila, for instance, of chaylev done less than a kazayis, there's no chorus, there's no misa b'dei shamayim either. Tamer b'me'ila mashenkin by me'ila shekain chayah b'misa b'pachos mikazayis. That by Me'ilah, there's Miseh B'dei Shemayim, even if there's less than a Kazai. So that's the Chumrah of Me'ilah. That's why you have to learn out from the Pasuk, because by Me'ilah, that has that Chumrah, that even if there's less than a Kazai, if he ate less than a Kazai of it, he still has Miseh B'dei Shemayim. That's why it's Chumrah. That's why you need the Pasuk. B'shkaga, Prat L'mezid. V'amalei, when he heard this, then Rav Nachman Yitzchak said to Rechia Bar Aven, Tanuch daitcha shinachta daiti. So you should be at ease because you put my mind at ease. V'omar lei, Rechia Am said to him, my nichusa, why do you have any Tanuch daiti? Why are you at ease with this terrace? The Rabbi Rav Shesher shot up a narga. They swung an axe at it and they destroyed it. They slugged it up. So what is the pircha that they had? So that we'll see in the next Amud and how this relates to our discussion that we had by Truma.